Hi there, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in the East. President Joe Biden has soared to a 63% approval rating, proving that shots in arms, COVID relief, and not being an insane egomaniac isn't just good for the country. It polls well, too. The Associated Press shows Biden's climb to 63% in its poll, with just 36% disapproving. The New York Times analysis of the poll describes it this way, quote, the widest approval margin in an AP poll since Mr. Biden took office. 54% of respondents see the country on the right track. 44% see the country on the wrong track. Of this, the Times writes, quote, for the first time in AP polling going back 4 years, a majority of Americans said that the country is heading in the right direction. President Joe Biden seems to have given the country its optimism back. On many of the issues most important to voters, President Biden also gets high marks. 71% of Americans approve of the job the president is doing on combating the coronavirus. 62% approve of the president's job on health care. President Biden even gets a 57% approval rating for his handling of the economy, and a majority of Americans, 54%, approve of his handling of foreign affairs. It is good news for the White House and gives them an even stronger hand for any dealings with the Republican Party, as it cements its descent into an anti-democratic, anti-truth, pro-big lie gang of Trump dead-enders on the verge of purging Liz Cheney from her leadership post for the offense of telling the truth about the legitimacy of Joe Biden's election. Lindsey Graham reprising his role as the man without a core, saying publicly on the record, quote, you're just not going to be a leader in the party if you're anti-Trump. I think it would be a disaster for the Republican Party if we just didn't acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump's the most popular person in the party. The American First agenda is well respected. If you tried to run him out of the party, he'd take half the party with him. So there we have it, out loud once again, thanks to Lindsey Graham. The disgraced, deplatformed ex-president is such a petty, petulant brat that if we don't indulge him, he'll take his toys and his voters and go home. And the Republicans want to protect America from enemies, foreign and domestic. They can't even protect their own party. Last night, Mitt Romney weighed in on the incredible shrinking appeal of the GOP.
Ronald Reagan made it clear that calling our party a big tent was more likely to draw people in, and that's what we need to do to win elections. If you narrow the tent to a pup tent, you make it less likely that we win elections. I can't imagine that rejecting Liz Cheney from leadership is going to draw in more voters. It may lose a number of voters who were still sticking with us.
As President Biden soars in popularity, the GOP morphs into what Mitt Romney, its one-time standard-bearer, calls a pup tent. And that is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Of course, Tim Miller's here, former communications director for Jeb Bush's presidential campaign, now writer-at-large for The Bulwark. Jason Johnson's here as well, journalism and politics professor at Morgan State University and the GRIO, and an MSNBC contributor, and former senator and MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill's here. Claire, I have to start with you. I don't even know what to say anymore. At least, I guess, it's all out in the open. It's all out loud. But they're not likely to heed the warnings of the Mitt Romneys in the party, and they seem to be on the verge of purging Liz Cheney for the crime of telling the truth. Where do they go from here, in your view?
Well, obviously, they've checked their integrity at the door. They all know that they're participating in this big lie. They all know that they're co-conspirators in the big lie, and they're rejecting Liz Cheney because she has this old-fashioned notion that you need to tell the truth. So they've now become a primary party. They're not a general election party anymore. They are just about winning primaries. And the weird thing is, if you just do the math, let him take half the Republican Party. It's pretty darn small now anyway. Take half of it and let them be the fringe. Let the remaining Republicans, they could join with the independents and actually contest elections. But at the rate they're going, they're going to keep electing crazy town in their primaries, and then they're not going to have success in the general election. I mean, look how many popular elections the Republican Party has lost for the presidency. I mean, you can count on just a couple of fingers how many they've won. And it's just going to get worse if they don't go back to the old-fashioned notion that Americans like people who are humble and who tell the truth.
You know, speaking of people who are humble and tell the truth, that is very much the president's brand, Jason Johnson. They have not tried to do anything fancy or elaborate. They've simply tried to carry out the most elaborate logistical undertaking in modern history and get needles with vaccines into the arms of 300 million Americans. And it would appear, based on today's AP poll, that the public approves very much.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Nicole. It's like we're still, it's hard to imagine this again because somebody tried to take over the country in January. We're still reeling from 4 years of insane incompetence, right? Like the fact that Joe Biden is doing something so elaborate, so complicated, with no head start. Because remember, they didn't even want to give him the keys to the palace, so to speak, until sometime after January 20th. It really, really is amazing how effective Joe Biden has managed to be. And even with relatively low job numbers last month, the fact that people are able to begin going out, the fact that you've got more rural areas that have access to this vaccine, the fact that we haven't had any major scandals in government. Think about it. The only scandals that we've had in government so far have to do with Republicans' recalcitrance to actually continue to do their job. So it's been really impressive to see what Joe Biden has done so far. I think, again, that's one of the reasons not just why his approval is up, but why the Republicans have just gone absolutely nuts in their sort of circling firing squad, because they can't target him. You can't go after Joe Biden right now because he's basically doing his job, which is something we haven't seen in 4 years.
Tim, I don't want to skip over the significance of these poll numbers. I mean, this is still a country in crisis, but it's also a country that's had more than 100 days to look at the president's governing style, to let his approach to sort of really now generation-long problems sink in. They see what he's for, and they like it. That feels like a real gust of wind at the back of a president doing pretty big transformational things.
For sure, Nicole. And look, I wrote about this back in the primary when Joe Biden kind of surged to this victory out of nowhere. And I think there is a silent majority in this country, right? And the silent majority is what Donald Trump used to say and you know, George Wallace used to say about the racist voters, that they were the silent majority. But I think that the silent majority it's turned out has been people who just want to go back to their lives and want to have competent leadership in Washington, right? On you know, cable shows and on our Twitter feeds, you know, we're all such virulent partisans, and our hair is on fire, and we're mad for good reason. You know, a lot of times about what Donald Trump's been doing, for bad reason, maybe on some other networks. But there are a lot of voters out there that I think really are just looking to get back to their lives and want the economy to turn around, want to be able to get back to normal. And I think Joe Biden appealed to them in the Democratic primary, in the general election, and now even among some voters who voted for Donald Trump maybe reluctantly, or voters who didn't turn out to vote, which is why you can see his poll numbers ticking up. Now, I'm always the rain cloud on the show, so I do want to offer a note of caution. The polls have been, I think, oversampling Democrats a little bit, right? I think if you looked at the general election, I think that there are a lot of MAGA voters out there who just don't respond to pollsters anymore. I think pollsters are having a little bit of trouble navigating that. But even if the number's 55, not 63, I think that still shows this broad, middle of the country, silent majority that Joe Biden is speaking to. And as long as he's effective, I think he can continue to maintain those numbers.
Claire, I didn't mean to leave you out of the conversation about this president. And there are things that he seems to have deployed as president that he obviously, I think, picked up from senators like yourself. I mean, he is governing in a way that is nothing short of transformational. He sees government in a dramatically different way, certainly than his predecessor, but even than previous Democratic presidents. But it is his moderate temperament that seems to, I don't know, maybe be softening the earth for some of these big changes in the way government has functioned, at least for the last decade.
Well, the things he's proposing, Nicole, and we've talked about this before, you know, first of all, he's embracing the character traits we all were taught in kindergarten. Be kind to others, be empathetic, tell the truth. I mean, just the basic things that we have always taken for granted in our presidents up until we had the other guy. But the other thing he's doing is he is going after policies that are very popular. Many people in Washington do not understand that gnawing thing in the pit of your stomach because you're not really sure where you left your child was safe because you had to go to work. The whole issue around I can't afford daycare and my job. All of the things that really impact American families, those are the causes he's taking up. And people hear him. They hear him taking up those causes and they realize he gets it. And that's why his numbers are the kind of numbers that Donald Trump could only dream of.
And dream he did, Jason doesn't. I now, regrettably, have to turn to... I think he also benefits from the fact that the Republican Party is AWOL from any sort of good faith and legitimate policy debate. There certainly are debates to be had around policy, but the Republican Party doesn't seem interested in having them. And they're certainly clouding out their own ability to drive a message that is anything other than their complete servitude to the disgraced ex-president, and more importantly, more dangerously for the country, the big lie about the election. And if you think what's happening in Washington is scary, I mean, what's happening in Arizona is scarier. And what's happening in 47 states, Beto O'Rourke was here yesterday talking about a basically four-alarm fire, that democracy is under assault. There was no election fraud, the Republican Party seeming to push voter restriction laws. And then, as we've been talking about now for 2 weeks, ready to purge Liz Cheney tomorrow. I wonder what you make of the state of, no opposition party for this president in playing into these approval ratings.
So here's the thing, Nicole. There is opposition, but just opposition to the entire American project. Like, I think about last week, which would have been a perfect opportunity for a functional opposition to say, hey, look, the jobs numbers are lower than you thought. You should be complaining about it. But what do we hear from Republicans? They were stabbing each other in the back like the end of, some Greek play, and they were talking about cancel culture. Cancel culture is not feeding me, okay? Like, cancel culture is not letting me go back to work. It's not letting me go back to school. And that's one of the difficulties. And this is the two ways this sort of plays in the real world and what we're looking at voting-wise. Right now, we have a country that feels like we're slightly getting back to normal. I went to a museum last week and I almost had tears in my eyes. I saw people with their kids going through a museum en masse. Like, the country is vaguely coming back. So people are happy with what the president is doing. He needs to use that sort of popularity to push people like Manchin, to push people like Kristen Sinema, to do something about the voting laws that are being pushed throughout the country. It is not just a four-alarm fire. Everybody knows. We literally saw what happened when Democrats are allowed to vote under oppressive circumstances. A red state flips. That's what we saw in Georgia. You end up getting two Democratic senators, both of whom have been really fantastic and have sort of staked their own ground in Congress. With the laws that were just passed in Georgia, Ossoff and Warnock probably couldn't have gotten elected. I mean, literally, with what Brian Kemp just passed. So if Joe Biden wants this to continue, he's got to convince everybody that if we want more Georgias, we got to make sure that Arizona and Texas and all these other states can't get through with these laws. And that's federal legislation and Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice getting active.
And, Tim, there's some great new reporting that sort of speaks to this Frankenstein that is what has emerged in place of what used to be known as the Republican Party, in which you and I worked. And I think what makes it front burner news is the danger it poses to, as Jason just said, the Democratic experiment. There's some great new reporting in the Washington Post from Michael Kranish, who profiles Josh Hawley. And this is from that piece. Quote, I feel very responsible for Josh Hawley being in the Senate. I feel terrible about it, said former Senator John Danforth, who recently called his encouragement of Hawley's Senate run the greatest mistake of my life. He added Josh Hawley played a central role in creating, if not the darkest day in American history, one of the darkest days in American history. What do you make of Republicans who you and I both know, who sat on the sidelines, who watched the corruption, if you will, of the Republican Party, who watched the ascent of the Ted Cruzes and the Lindsey Grahams, the one-time wingmen of people like John McCain, who traveled the world to prop up fragile democracies, now participating in the damaging of ours?
I don't have the vocabulary for this, Nicole, and it's just so disheartening in the extreme to have to live through it and to have to watch it. And especially after January 6th, I mean, man, you remember, we were all here, but leading up to the election, I was mad that more Republicans weren't speaking out. I was mad that it fell to people like Olivia Troy and Elizabeth Newman coming out of the Trump administration, that there were no bigger names that were out there and making this fight. Some of the people we had worked for that sat on the sidelines. But then, after they stormed the Capitol, still now to have people sitting on the sidelines, still to have a permanent insurrection party, because that's what this is. If you look at what's happening with Liz Cheney, the only debate here is on whether the insurrection was a good thing, that they should continue to lie about, that they should continue to talk about how the election needed to be overturned, or whether it was something we need to move away from. That's the only debate that is happening within the party. And the one woman that is on the side of the insurrection being bad is getting cast out. And Josh Hawley and the rest of the pro-insurrectionists are sticking with the party. And so I think that leaves us in a very stark and dark place. And it does, I can't lie, it does get frustrating when I see people that I once liked and respect look at all that and say, well, you know, Joe Biden is spending a little bit too much on infrastructure for my taste. I mean, I can't, that doesn't resonate with me. Well, look, I mean, you know, we just had John Boehner on this book tour. I think that the people that were in the Trump cabinet, you know, that should have been speaking out, who said they were the Mattises and the Tillersons. Frankly, I think that the retired Republican class. I mean, I just look, you know, Kasich and even the Bush family. Frankly, like why can't some of them just be for Joe Biden? If I have insurrection on one side and maybe spending a little bit too much on my taste on the other side, it's frustrating to see a lot of them saying, well, I'm just going to take a pass on that one.
Claire McCaskill, I share Tim's feeling, and I think we both know all the folks that have sort of been out publicly talking about who they wrote in for election. This wasn't a choice between a Democratic candidate who might spend more than a traditional Republican and a Republican. This was a choice between a lying, corrupt, it turned into an insurrectionist, and a patriot. And I wonder, I want to read you some more. I saved this piece from this new reporting in the Washington Post by Michael Krenish for you. The piece goes on to describe, I think for the very first time, an interaction between Mitt Romney and Josh Hawley. It starts like this, quote, "You have caused this," Senator Mitt Romney erupted at Hawley, referring to the events building up to the storming of the Capitol, according to a person familiar with the exchange who spoke anonymously. Can you imagine if Mitt Romney, flanked by all those folks Tim just named, Jim Mattis, H.R. McMaster, Dina Powell, people who have a lifetime of caring not just about our democracy, but about democracies around the world, came out and said, Josh Hawley, you caused this. So did you, Donald Trump. So did you, Ted Cruz, and really sought to draw a line around anti-democratic lies in their own party?
You know, I remember when I was running against a Republican nominee for the Senate who said something outrageous, and the Republican Party came together and said, we don't accept this. We don't accept what Todd Aiken said. We don't accept what he represents. Think how far the Republican Party has fallen, that now not only do they accept people committing insurrection and sedition against our government, not only do they accept the President of the United States committing a fraud, a big lie on our democracy, which we treasure, not only are they doing that, they're continuing to sit silently as they oust a truth teller. You know, and I got to tell you the truth. If one of these Republicans has the nerve to talk about cancel culture with what they're doing to Liz Cheney, I would use such an unladylike word right now if I could. I mean, F them. You know, I mean, what about that? They want to lecture us about Dr. Seuss and the cancel culture, and they are canceling her. They are canceling Liz Cheney because she has the audacity to tell the truth. Shame on all of them.
And proving that we need a show on premium cable where we can use that word because it's so called for. But I just want to make this final point. It's not us, it's them. Here's Lindsey Graham speaking the truth and the lies out of the same two lips. Watch.
The most popular Republican in America, it's not Lindsey Graham, it's not Liz Cheney, it's Donald Trump.
I'm not going to try to get into the mind of Donald Trump because I don't think there's a whole lot of space there.
People on our side of the aisle believe that Trump policies worked. They're disappointed that he lost.
He gives voice to their anger and their frustration, but he's not fit to be president of the United States.
And to try to erase Donald Trump from the Republican Party is insane. And the people who try to erase him are going to wind up getting erased.
We think that he's unfit for office, that he would be a terrible commander-in-chief. He doesn't have the temperament or judgment.
It's impossible for this party to move forward without President Trump being its leader.
Okay. We would get slaughtered as a party if Donald Trump's our nominee, and quite frankly, we would deserve it.
Tim, without getting into, what's wrong with Lindsey Graham, again, they all know better.
Yeah, I wish that would have included the video from January 6th of this year when Lindsey Graham said we need to move forward before he was shouted down in Reagan National Airport by Donald Trump supporters. And you put me on the spot there by asking me for names in the last question. I want to add another one I was thinking about while Clara was talking about. What about the Speaker of the House who was there when all that was happening, Paul Ryan, who's now on the board at Fox? And who's making, who was at loggerheads with Donald Trump, who's making the rounds, who made his whole career about, fighting for conservative principles. And now Liz Cheney is getting kicked out of leadership in that caucus, and he's silent. He's silent. He was silent on January 6th. He's silent now. I mean, there is a critical mass of people that could have spoken out when Lindsey Graham said it was time to move forward, when Mitch McConnell did on January 6th, to have the Ryans and the Boehners and people you mentioned in the Trump cabinet, Nikki Haley. Had they all held the line, we really could be to a place where we're fighting about whether the transportation and infrastructure bill costs too much. And wouldn't that be a good place to be? But instead, we have to be concerned about the very foundation of our democracy.
Under threat from one of the two parties. It's an unbelievable state of affairs. Tim, Jason, and Claire are all staying with us. When we come back, trying to put a stop to the restrictive voting laws sweeping through state houses across the country. Democrats today are expected to advance their own elections bill as Republicans dig in, arguing these state laws are necessary to combat the non-existent fraud that led to Trump's 2020 loss. I know, it doesn't make any sense to me either. Plus, as we've been discussing, the party of Trump moves forward with tomorrow's expected demotion of Liz Cheney. And then there's Matt Gaetz with his alleged drug use and alleged sex with underage girls, and the GOP, yes, stands by him. We'll talk more about the party's capitulation to Trumpism next.